Hi, welcome to another episode of Conversations with Annie and Kate. Today we have Annie Parker and Michelle Duval. Over to you, Annie, to do the introductions.
Good morning, everybody. I'm coming through to you from a tiny ass northern town in north of England. It's raining outside, which is very British. It's sort of greeted me with a ton of drizzle. So it's lovely to be able to speak to two very friendly faces this morning to brighten up my day. So Michelle Duval, Michelle and I have known each other for a little while now, and she's got a super interesting career history so far. So let's do a quick intro and then we're going to dig into some questions and do our general chat. So Michelle has, for more than 20 years now, been working with inventors, people who've built businesses, using the tools and the cultures of tomorrow to basically create the world's future. During her childhood, her father owned a small fashion business representing lots of global fashion brands, but passionate as he was about his business, and the family sort of had to traverse all of the ups and downs of what business life looks like, particularly when you're in your own one and you don't get paid all of the time and all that kind of stuff. Michelle remembered thinking that there's got to be a better way of running these businesses. Sadly, at age 12, he wasn't ready to listen to her advice back then. So when she eventually started her own company in 1997, which if those of you who don't know, Michelle is one of Australia's most lauded professional business coaches. In fact, probably one of the best in the world, I would say. That's my view. She can tell me off later for saying that. And having worked with creative artists, actors, writers, producers, inventors, figuring out that these business owners were somewhat successful, some struggling, and she noticed that if they were able to sort of facilitate and navigate changes in their personal attitudes, then other important things happened with their businesses as well. She could see a direct relationship between the personal work and clients making a genuine difference around the world as well. And after noticing that relationship, she and her team were eager to identify sort of empirical or scientific ways to test theses that people's motivations and attitudes influence their business outcomes. Something that I completely agree with, and I can't wait to share a little bit more about your business fingerprint for success and everything that you've been up to over the last, how long has that business been going for now, Michelle?
We launched it in 2016, this time 2016, 4 years.
4 years old already. Goodness me.
It's past its toddlerhood almost.
It has. Now, anyway, welcome to the podcast, Michelle. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Oh, what an amazing intro, Annie. Thank you. That's amazing.
You're very welcome. Now, first question, what are you drinking?
I'm drinking in my water bottle. I'm drinking just water.
Oh, I've got red wine.
Oh, good on you.
And it's a Cote de Rhone.
Very good, very good. I'm in my most enormous cup of mug of good old English breakfast tea, because it's a bit early for wine, even for me.
Well, I'd like to have a wine, but I can't drink wine.
Really? Why not?
No. Oh, I've had numerous different sort of health conditions and I just can't really drink alcohol. Every time I try, I end up very, very ill. So I stick to my water.
Very sensible, very sensible. All right, Kate, over to you for the first question.
I am going to ask you, what is the one thing that has most surprised you in your career?
What a great question. What's the one thing that's most surprised me in my career? I think, and this will go against a lot of things and I'd be interested to hear your views on it, but I have always just believed that I could contribute wherever I wanted to contribute. And even if I was younger, or even if I was female, even if I didn't have experience or I wasn't educated in a particular area, I've been surprised that I can deep dive into a particular area and I'll give it a good crack and I'll model the best wherever they are, or I'll fall over and scrape my knees. And I feel, I guess, surprised that I've had so many amazing opportunities to work with so many amazing different people, and still not answering your question. Surprised me. I guess I feel surprised by that.
I think so a lot of people often talk about, they perhaps don't have that innate confidence, and they surprise themselves when they do get stuck in and realize they can do things. So I think what you've just articulated there is it's the same perhaps problem that lots of people talk about, but just from a different angle. And I do wonder, and my dad and I have been talking about it recently, just that whole sort of, he never gave me any reason to doubt myself. So I was very similar as well growing up as a kid. For those of you who haven't met me in real life, I'm only about 5'1". I'm pretty small, but I've never felt small in any room I've ever been in. That there's what you bring to the world isn't just about your skin color, your sex, your size. I think I'm very similar, actually, Michelle. I always think that I've got something to add in pretty much most conversations. I'm also very good at shutting up and listening to people as well, because I think that's important too. But I think that sort of innate confidence, maybe it's something that you're sort of, it has to be nurtured when you're a kid.
Yeah, I remember in my very first career, I studied hotel management, and I worked in deluxe 5-star hotels. And one of the roles that I had, I was super young, super inexperienced, and at the time, the hotel I worked in was the #1 hotel in Australia, and we hosted all of the government dignitaries, so presidents and prime ministers of countries, and there was lots of protocol and certain right ways to do things. And then there was lots of very famous people, rock stars, and athletes and so on. And part of my role was to host them and do red carpet arrivals with the federal police and all these sorts of things. And there's lots of protocol, and I accidentally would always break the protocol. You weren't meant to ask them any personal questions. You weren't meant to, you were meant to just be a silent person with no, and then I would, invariably ask them, ask them personal things. And I would always get into really big trouble, but I just know that humans are valuable and equal, and some people have more experience and expertise and they've studied in certain domains, but like humans like to be treated with friendliness and warmth, and normal to have normal communication with people. So anyway, I used to always get in big trouble for that all the time. And so, but that's how I learned so much. I just learned so much, by being curious about other people. And I wouldn't be offering anything to them. I'd just be asking questions. I'd just be deeply curious about whatever their thing was. But in a way that I would try to be in a way that wasn't, like the fan or the intrusive individual, but just genuinely curious.
Gotcha. All right, my question for you to open you up a bit more. What's the one thing that you've done that you will never do again? And it could be personal, it could be career oriented, either or.
I would never combine my finances with my partner.
Interesting. And why is that?
Well, I've been through 3 financial settlements. And this is an interesting journey in terms of choices and, again, this belief that anything's possible. So, and that's come with 3 significant financial setbacks for me. And the way that all went down, and never, when I look back, and if I say to young women, how do we handle our own money? There's an unconscious bias for women to combine our finances. And then when it comes to, financial settlements, as we know, most often women fare very differently to men in those circumstances. And there's no need to, one of my observations from coaching so many people, working with so many couples, you don't have to have your finances joined to be in a committed, loving, committed long-term relationship. Yes, that's a real big insight for me. It's been a painful insight through that. I've been married once and had 2 other financial, binding financial agreement sort of situations. And they've been very painful learnings. But I think many people can benefit from understanding that you can still be, because you feel like I'm not going to be committed if you don't join all your finances together and have one pool and you're only all working together towards that goal. So yeah,
it's an interesting one. It's not one that I remember, gosh, years and years ago, I was living with a guy and we ended up splitting up, and I swore to myself that I would never be homeless again. So it was his apartment, so I had to leave. And I ended up having to move in with my parents again for a little while because I literally had nowhere else to go. Yeah. And I swore to myself I would never do that again. I would always have, even if it's only a tiny ass little apartment somewhere, or have a rental property that I can pull back if I need to. Yeah, get kind of similar moment. How about you, Kate? Have you ever had those conversations?
It's the advice I always give to younger women. I always tell them a man is not a plan. So that's one thing. And my husband and I, we ran separate finances for like 20 years. Yeah. And eventually he just came to me and said, can't you just look after it all for me? So I now look after all of our finances, but I think I can rely on him after 20 years. So,
That's fair. That's very fair.
And what made you decide to do that in the early place? What was the principles or the premise behind that?
It just never occurred to me to do it because, he used to earn a lot more than me. I was the poor one in those days. And I just thought, well, we'll go halves in everything. And when I can't afford stuff, I'll be able to say, well, I can't afford to do that, so I won't put money into it. So that was how we did it. And we went on that way for a really long time, obviously. 20 years is a long time. But then he decided that with the mortgage and everything that we had, he just wanted someone else to look after it. So handed it over.
I think that's a different moment, isn't it? When you're 20 years into a relationship and you realize one of you is actually just better at this stuff. Just better at it.
Bless him, he doesn't understand the offset mortgage. He's a mathematician.
He's a maths teacher, not just.
I know. I've tried drawing it on whiteboards and all sorts of things. Anyway, so he's just decided. But yeah, I can understand why you say that, and I'm glad I did it at the time. Because, it would have been much easier if we did break up because it was really clear.
Yeah, I'm just such a person who's all in, very collaborative, want to do everything together. What's mine is yours. And I always think you can recover from all of these things. But as you travel along in life and you go through those circumstances, I think that the key learning insight for me is that it does, the way the bank accounts and the assets are structured doesn't correlate and relate to the level of love and commitment. And sometimes that's a confusion.
Yeah,
entering into those relationships.
So tell us a bit more about how you transitioned from being, the sort of the classic kind of business and leadership coach into basically being a tech entrepreneur. How did that happen?
Well, I was having the honor and the privilege of coaching so many founders of startups and high growth companies, and it was an extraordinary experience, like the earlier career of working with the world's best, and then also working with people at various different stages of that journey, and people struggling to raise capital, or people, having different challenges along that journey of scaling their great idea or whatever it was. So I ended up doing that study, which was this sort of world first study. I found a university in the UK to partner with me on the study, and Dr. Sabina Kleitman from the University of Sydney. And we did, an empirical study of looking at, is there any correlation between motivations and attitudes at work and these venture and business outcomes? And we found significant correlations. And then we spent 4.5 years taking those findings, saying, okay, that data is super interesting, but does it have any impact? Does it make actually any difference? And so we applied it to over 1,000 businesses and tracked them over 4.5 years. And we saw that the data alone and the insight had an impact, but if people were coached, it had an impact. And if they were coached and mentored, it had a huge impact. And so I just got really passionate about wanting to be able to scale and make accessible those insights, but really importantly, coaching. In the moment in the world, coaching is hugely not accessible to most people. Only the elite can have it, the famous person or the athlete or the founder or the CEO. If we estimated the population that had access to coaching, it wouldn't even be 0.5%. And I don't think that, coaching and self-actualization and people being empowered to realize who they are in the world and to make their mark in the world should be just, for a small percentage of the population. So the whole idea of our platform is to democratize coaching and make it accessible and available to everyone. So there's 3 engines in the platform. One is the people analytics that measures people's motivations at work. The second one is this benchmarking against the empirical studies. And then the third one is releasing the world's first personal artificial intelligent coach, so that anybody can have access to growth, development, their potential possibilities, so everyone can have access.
I love that.
You asked earlier how old the business is, so you're 4 years in.
Yeah.
How would you describe that 4 years so far?
Well, the study itself, I did the study before, sort of we
Yes.
finished it in 13 or 14. That was so hard as I've ever done. And of course, I've had my coaching business for over 20 years now, but you know, a tech business, and you both know because you support so many people in the startup phase, it's really challenging. So we've had a lot of support. We've got some amazing investors and other people who've really believed in the idea of being able to make coaching available to other people. So I'm grateful to have a lot of support. It's a lot of learning. So I've been exhilarated by the challenges in myself that I've had to grow through in myself. The constant learning. It's also exciting. It's super rewarding to be able to be at the precipice of inventing things. That's what gets me excited, is inventing things that help people. So it's exciting, rewarding, challenging, sometimes crawled up on a ball, looking in the mirror, asking, why am I doing this?
Corner sometimes, let's just sit there and rock gently.
Yep.
We all do that.
Well, you know, I've had a couple of startups, so it's a challenging thing to do. But congratulations on getting to 4 years. That's an achievement, considering most of them die before they're 5.
Yeah. Yeah, it's had its ups and downs and journeys to be where we are today.
So who do you get your coaching from?
I work with all sorts of different people. So I've got different mentors that I go to for different topics of different things. I'm so fortunate to have access to so many founders who've done amazing things. So they're all really excited about supporting coaching coming into the world because they've all benefited from it. So not all of them, but most of them are really keen to support that vision. So from different founders, and I'm deeply into constantly working through my stuff as well. So I use different coaching techniques from different people. So I use a technique called neuro-emotional technique, which is coaches the body. And I found that to be really helpful for me to move. So I do a lot of self, and then I move stuff through my body. So one of the things that I've learned through coaching is that one thing is to make a mental shift, but unless you can do that through embodiment, where it's in the body and it comes out in expression and behavior, it's just an idea, just a concept. So I'm always keen to figure out how to accelerate things getting into the body, and then it becoming just natural and congruent and authentic.
Interesting. Can you give us an example of what that would, how that would manifest?
So the technique was developed for people who had serious pain and they weren't able to overcome their pain. And so chiropractors use the technique, and they use a methodology called kinesiology. Have you ever experienced kinesiology? So they use kinesiology to coach basically the body. And so you go in with something that you want to break through, or you want to develop, or a limitation, or a grief, or a hurt, or whatever it is. And then through kinesiology. So for those of you who are listening, kinesiology is a scientific-based methodology that uses muscle testing to be able to speak beyond the conscious mind, to be able to ask your body questions. And through asking the body questions, they have a technique with the NET, the neuro-emotional technique, which allows you to release things through your body or take on board new beliefs or ideas and to embed them into your nervous system, basically. So initially it was for pain relief. And now people use it for emotional pain relief, I guess, and for building new belief systems and for breaking through limitations.
So how have you used it? Can you give us an example? I'm really fascinated by this.
Yeah, so I think part of why coaching is so innate to me, and it has been since I was very, very young. I was the girl at school that everyone told their problems to. I asked a lot of questions. I was very curious. I've just been this curious, potentially, as I said earlier, annoying sometimes person. And so one of the things we measure in Fingerprint for Success is, where do you author your decisions from? Are you internally referenced or are you externally referenced? So those who are motivated by external reference, they love data, they love speaking to the expert, they love looking at external references to be able to contribute to the decision or make the full decision. And people who are very strong on internal reference are very strong at their own internal criteria, following their own intuition, their own gut feel. And as a coach, my role was very externally referenced. I want you to facilitate your own answers, your own decisions, your own discoveries, all of those things. And so for me to transition from facilitating others to make their decisions, it means that I was very low on that internal reference in that context. And so for me then, as a founder, the research in our data set found that high external reference for a startup founder was actually correlated with early stage venture failure. And it's so innate in me. Like I'd be like my career in service. Like my whole focus is on others. But I've got this big, audacious, hairy vision that I want to contribute to the world. And if I'm always externally referencing to others, I'm not, backing my decisions as strongly as I could, or trusting myself as much as I could, or making a decision that other people really hate if it's the right decision for things. And so it got me into some difficult situations that, really risked the business as well. And so I really had to commit to a journey of really working through that, and being able to have choice over when I reference other people for input into decisions, and when I just make decisions and make the call and feel comfortable. Now, I could always do it. Everyone can do it, but it would be stressful for me and my body. And strong leaders have to make decisions all the time that other people don't like. And so I've used the neuro-emotional, the NET technique, to be able to strengthen that in myself, to feel really comfortable and authentic rather than I'm, doing it.
That's really interesting how you had to shift yourself from your customary mode of life coach to the boss.
Yeah. It's been I found it to be honest, very traumatic. Because as a coach, particularly with the people I've chosen to work with and they chose to work with me, I'm working with people who want to be real, authentic, they want to grow, they want to be on their knees to become the best person they can be. They're contributing to big companies, many people's lives, or they're a politician, or they're someone creating art that transforms the world, and they're really committed to being all they can be. So my full days are sitting with people who are so committed to being vulnerable, real, and open. And then, the ratio of coaching, I've only got 2 coaching clients at the moment, and now I'm full-time in building, a commercial business. And I was just so blindsided and shocked in the corporate world, in corporate enterprise life, how I'm coping with extreme masks and charade of not being able to be comfortably vulnerable and open. And you'd ask them a real question, how are you? And they would give you something that they're meant to say. And then it was not deep and meaningful, normal conversation. Now, I was on the other spectrum. And so my poor first team that I had, they were like, you asked too many personal questions. But
I had asking questions.
Could you just stop? And I don't need to be. I just really want to know how you are today. You were sick last week. Are you all right? But I didn't realize how that's not. People don't trust that as sincere. It's scary.
I'm sorry. Isn't that what everybody does? Don't you ask people if they were sick last week how they are? I do, and I know Annie would. Isn't that just human?
It's been interesting because I remember speaking with Michelle. It's probably about 2 years ago now, and you're having a conversation about how hard it is to actually get customers to sign up and basically become a customer, particularly from an enterprise environment, because it just takes so long to go through the the sales process and the procurement part of it. And sometimes people will say things just to say things rather than they mean it. And you're like, well, if you don't want the product, that's fine. Just tell me.
Yeah.
Just tell me. But they don't do that. They keep you stringing you along. And it's just, it is fascinating how inefficient business really is, where if we were just super honest and saying no is fine, just tell me, I can then move on.
I know, but it's really fascinating because my background is large corporates. So I've worked in really big global multinationals for most of my life. And the enterprise sales cycle is ridiculously long. But often I'm just not interested, and I just go, no, I'm not interested. So I think a lot of people are too polite to say that to someone's face, but I just don't think it's fair to waste.
I don't think it's politeness. I think that they don't know how to say no, that it's confronting.
Yeah.
I'd rather avoid having to have the tough conversation, because saying I don't want you or I don't want your product perhaps may elicit a response that I'm not ready to deal with.
And so that's one part of it. And the other part of it is just normal human conversation where people can be vulnerable and open around what's going on in their lives, because work is so busy, people are under so much pressure. People don't have time to engage at a really human to human level. And I came out of an environment where that's all my world was about. All I did for 20 years, that's what I had become accustomed to was normal. And so it was super confronting and actually really sad. I had so much grief. I cried a lot at how sad we've become as humans in our little rat race of, people still wanting to do good things, will commit, nothing about that. It's just a situated pattern that we as humans have got into, of being a little bit mechanical and being a little bit guarded and not trusting that people, and therefore not being completely honest, as you were just saying. And you think that's normal, Kate, but you're here running a podcast where you want to have real conversations with people. So you're probably in my spectrum.
It's really interesting, because one of the things that I think my job is as a boss, as a manager and leader of people, is to create a psychologically safe workplace where everyone can achieve. Yeah. And you do that when it's safe, where you feel safe. And so that's the kind of environment that I try to create, where it's safe to make mistakes. It's not all the time. We don't like them all the time, but yeah, and mistakes are okay. And that it's okay to say stuff. And I think it's really, maybe I've just been running my own shows for so long that I've forgotten how bad it is, because I've worked for hideous managers, they all have. And when you think about everything about them, made me feel unsafe in the workplace.
And that was why I chose to actually coach founders of startups and high growth ventures, is because in the coaching with them, they would go there so far. Same with actors and producers and creative artists. There's no benefit from not being totally vulnerable and open and raw and just getting to the heart of something. And that's why I chose that population to coach, because one, they would go there. Two, they've got a lot on the line. They've got investors and customers and team members. If they're a genuine entrepreneur, they care about those things deeply. And thirdly, they're fast to take action on those things. They don't sit with them a lot. I was coaching lots of senior executives in many different corporations locally in America and Europe and so on. And in the enterprise, it would take a long time in a program for them to warm up and realize that they could speak out loud their musings, and that they could be vulnerable with an idea that they have agreement to have. And by the end of a coaching program, they would get there. But the conditioning in those environments to toe the line, to be really, really hurt my soul, I think. And part of when I left corporate life, I was 25 or 6 when I left corporate life, and I made that decision that I wanted to transform the way that those things happen. And so my hope is through F4S and the technologies and tools that we're creating, that we'll be able to empower people to be able to be themselves at work, to be able to have real conversations and be safe, like you said, Kate, to do that.
What advice would you have for any other women out there, or any other folks who are listening, actually, just on that point, Michelle? What advice do you have for anybody who would like to be a little bit more like that in their workplace or with their teams, or perhaps even in their personal life as well? What advice do you have?
Well, it's kind of interesting, isn't it? Because in the conversation sounded so confident, didn't I? Like I'm saying I could do anything in my career. But what you're seeing is that despite that part of me that does feel that confident, there's that other part of me that feels so different and feels you know, really vulnerable in those environments. Like it's very hard to be yourself in those environments, isn't it? Even if you are confident and courageous, it just feels super out on a limb. And so I think the learnings have been for me to really accept myself the way I am, and to get to a place of acceptance of my quirkiness, and that I am, you know, a bit weird sometimes, or a lot of the time. So the first one is that self-acceptance. And then the second one is practicing the skill of feedback. So I think great executives and great leaders and anyone who cares, the skill of observing what's going on in a dynamic, and then learning the art of being able to reflect it back and to pose questions that ask people to go meta to their experience at work. And it could just be as simple as a very simple thing. I had this at the end, and then we'll say, well, we didn't get much done, or, you know, we don't have an agenda, or, you know, whatever. And then I can also contribute and say, and I felt like we weren't that honest today, you know, whatever it is. I'm wondering if there's something in the way for us to speak truthfully about what happened. And then it could be an awkward moment, you know, it's a little zinger out there. And then the next meeting, and we just progressively open it up and invite people, but also be a role model. And I think, you know, one of the things that I've had to learn is that I'm very expressive of my emotions. I haven't always been, but I've learned to be more comfortable with that. And so particularly in tech environments, most people in a technical environment are much more neutral in their communication. They don't show as much facial expressions or tone of voice changes, or, you know, those sorts of things. They might be much more thoughtful about the words they choose. And our data shows this from F4S as well. So in those environments, I can choose words that express emotions, but I'm not going to overwhelm someone. It's being that conscious, thoughtful. It's not just my need for human connection, but finding ways to deeply connect with people that are meaningful for them. And it may be not showing any emotion, but it might be sending them a note and just saying some words that would be meaningful to them, or not saying anything, whatever it is for that person. So I think being mindful of our own needs, not requiring other people to be a certain way, and lowering my expectations that other people need to be vulnerable, that other people need to be open, and invite what I can do to contribute to create spaces for just people to be themselves.
That is really lovely. So how did you two meet?
We met, we must have known each other for about 6 or 7 years now. It was at
Muridi. Was it your first year?
Yeah, it was in the first year. So a mutual friend of ours, a wonderful guy called Mick Levinskus. Hey, Mick.
Love you, Mick.
Mick had been, I think, Mick and Michelle have known each other for a little longer than that as well. And actually, it was at the time when you were transitioning your research into the solution of, you know, the fingerprint for success as it exists today. And we actually ran. So Mick and I started basically a corporate funded startup accelerator based in Sydney. And we were a new team as well, but we also thought that perhaps Michelle's solution could be useful for some of the founders that were going through the accelerator. So we did F4S on ourselves first before we forced the founders to go through it too. And it was fascinating on lots of different levels. I learned a lot about myself, but I also learned a lot about my team and how to work better with them. And what Michelle just described of, you know, to be a great leader, you have to obviously, you know, sort of share as much as you can about or show the behavior that you want to see in your team to model that. But also you do need to know perhaps what the weaknesses are or the blind spots, I think is a better way of putting it, of your team, so that you can be aware that in a lot of cases, that person will typically make this mistake on a regular basis. And it's not because they're not super smart, it's a blind spot for them. And you, as a leader, if you're aware of those things, you can kind of be more mindful of that, help make sure that those moments may not happen, or at least that person in your team is aware that they have that blind spot and they're a little bit more alert to perhaps those mistakes as and when they get made. But super interesting to have gone through that. And then I've applied it on a couple of different team structures beyond that as well. And, you know, it's it's a great tool, and it's something that I would thoroughly recommend to any person out there who perhaps has set up a new team and they really need to kind of build that culture, or they want to understand the culture of the team that they have versus the one that they want to build. And obviously the same goes for any founder out there building a company. It's a super useful tool. So that's what I remember of the process anyway. Did I get that right, Michelle?
You sure did. You sure did. And what my learning is that Annie had come from an enterprise environment into this you know, one of the Australia's first accelerators, really. And what Annie and Mick were doing together was really, really groundbreaking. It was super challenging and all sorts of things. And then I was presenting FRS. It was still quite, you know, fumbling around in how we were presenting it because we hadn't sort of really got the value proposition right, despite the tools and the technology and the research all being there. And so I did this sort of fumbling presentation to Annie, and in all of her important rigor, she had lots of rigorous questions and challenges, and and I got a bit reactive, and Annie was beautiful and was very earnest in her approach to it, and it was just an awesome experience, and I learned a lot from that experience. So yeah.
Oh, that is marvelous, and I love that it is all data driven, and that is really powerful to me because I'm always talking about how we need to shift to making data driven decisions. Not that I want to be constrained by the data, but I think data can guide us better than our gut feelings sometimes.
Yeah, it's one of the points that we make is that it's an extra data point to support your gut feel.
Yeah.
So if you've got a gut feel on something, you can get some of this data that says, and it doesn't have to be a defining point that says I will or I won't work with you, or you're in or you're out, or whatever it is. It's like, that's what makes you tick. Oh, that's your genius and your talent, or that's a blind spot. So, you know, my blind spot is I'm going to ask too many questions, so I have to reel it in. It's, you know, people just understand that that's how we are. So for me, it's about diversity and creating diverse teams, and it's about cognitive diversity. And when we can embrace that, and that's why we do call it blind spots rather than weaknesses, is because in one context, like my external reference is my talent as a coach. Because if I'm going to tell you what to do, I'm going to be a mentor and a teacher and not a coach. I'm not going to tease out of you your unique genius. So that's a strength for me in a coaching context, but it's a blind spot in another context. And very often we can be too black and white about weaknesses and use them universally rather than contextually.
And I think that's a really, really valuable insight. And we're out of time. So thank you so much, Michelle. Thank you, Annie. It's really good. It was a really fascinating conversation.
No, that was so. I honestly, I just had to look at the clock and going, really, we've run out of time already.
I know.
Well, it's so lovely to speak to you both. Thank you for the thought-provoking questions. Really, really different kind of conversation. So thank you. Makes my heart happy.
Very much. And please leave us a good review because that would be nice. And we'll be back shortly. Thanks. Bye.